First of all,
She
like,
walked off
obviously,
the
it's
cool,
really, really
and she did
cool.
not come
Like,
back.
I probably
No
was
wave
never a
to the
kid that
crowd.
grew up thinking
No
that this was
smile
gonna be
for
in
the
the cards for
cameras.
me.
Just
I
silence
loved,
and a training staffer
wearing
at her
whatever
side,
Whatever
guiding her
Nike
down the
shoe it was
tunnel
growing
while
up. I remember my
18,000
first pair of
people sat there
Jordans,
wondering
like
what they
pink
had just
Jordans that I
watched.
had.
Somewhere in the arena,
And I
a
remember
phone lit up with a
my very
headline
first
that would
pink
spread
pair of
faster than
Nike
the truth ever could.
basketball shoes
And
that I
by
also
morning,
had,
half the
just like the
internet
very
believed
basic
something that
model. I
never
also had
actually happened.
just like the very basic
This is
model.
the
It wasn't
real
a shoe or
story,
anything, but for
not the fake
myself to
headline, not the
be
fake
able to have a
quote,
signature
the real
shoe
one.
and,
And it is stranger,
for young boys
sadder,
and,
and more
hopefully
human
want to
than
wear it
anything
and
a
be able to put it
clickbait
on
title
and,
could ever
dream. You
capture.
don't have to be a basketball player,
Because
but
here is
dream
the
to achieve
truth.
whatever
Caitlin
you
Clark did
want.
not
And
quit.
I think
Nobody confirmed her
what I hope
exit.
people feel
There
when
was
they
no
put the shoe
tearful
on.
press
And
conference where she
also that's
announced
really
she was
comfortable
done.
and it
That
looks pretty
story you might
cool
have seen
too.
floating around, the one with the commissioner supposedly
But that
confirming
it
she
kind of
walked
gives them a
away from the
superpower
Indiana
and
fever.
they, feel
It
like they can
simply is
express
not real.
themselves through the
But something else is happening to Caitlin Clark right now, something quieter, something that has been building for 2 years, and it is worth telling properly. Because the real story is not about a woman quitting. It is about a woman who keeps getting knocked down, again and again, in front of the entire world, and keeps finding a way to stand back up. So let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning, before the fame, before the back injuries, before the punches and the whistles and the arguments on national television. Let's go back to a gym in Iowa, where a skinny kid with a ponytail first picked up a basketball and threw it toward a hoop that felt impossibly far away. Nobody in that gym knew they were watching the future. That is how it always starts. Quietly, almost invisibly. A kid, a ball, a hoop, and an obsession that would not let go. Caitlin Clark grew up in West Des Moines, Iowa, the kind of place where basketball is not just a sport, it is a language people speak to each other. She had older brothers, and she chased them around driveways and gyms, refusing to be left behind, refusing to be the little sister who sat on the sidelines. If they were playing, she was playing. If they were shooting, she was shooting. And somewhere in those long evenings of getting knocked around by boys twice her size, something hardened inside her. A refusal to back down, a hunger that never really went away. By the time she reached high school, people in Iowa already knew her name. But nobody, not even the most optimistic scout, could have predicted what was coming. She went to the University of Iowa, and over 4 years, she did not just play basketball. She rewired what people thought was possible on a basketball court. She pulled up from 30 feet like it was nothing. She threw passes that defenders never saw coming. She scored more points than any player in Division I history, man or woman. Arenas that used to sit half empty for women's basketball started selling out. Grandmothers who had never watched a full game in their lives were suddenly glued to their televisions on a Tuesday night, watching a college kid from Iowa pull up from the logo like it was routine. She became more than a player. She became a reason for people to watch a sport they had ignored for decades, a reason for arenas to fill up, a reason for television ratings to shatter records that had stood for years. And when she declared for the WNBA draft, it was not a question of if she would be picked first. It was a countdown to the moment everyone already knew was coming. The Indiana Fever selected her first overall in 2024. And just like that, the hardest part of her story began. Because here is something people forget when they watch highlight reels and imagine fame is only sunshine and cheering crowds. The WNBA is a brutal league. It is played by grown women who have spent their entire adult lives getting stronger, faster, and more physical, fighting for a smaller number of roster spots in a league that, for years, did not get the attention or the money it deserved. And then, suddenly, here comes a rookie, 22 years old, drawing more cameras and more coverage than entire teams had ever seen before. Some players welcomed her. Genuinely, warmly, the way you welcome someone who is about to help grow the whole sport. But others saw something different. They saw a target. A rookie who had never taken a professional hit in her life, about to learn what it really costs to play at this level. And so her rookie season became something like a trial by fire. Elbows, hard fouls, hands in her face on every possession. Veterans daring her to prove she belonged, testing whether the spotlight had made her soft. It hadn't. She kept getting up. Possession after possession, hit after hit, she kept getting up, kept shooting, kept finding teammates with passes that made grown professionals shake their heads in disbelief. She earned Rookie of the Year. She made the All-Star team. She turned Indiana Fever games, once an afterthought on the WNBA schedule, into some of the most watched events in the sport's history. But her body was paying a price that the highlight reels never showed. By the next season, in 2025, the toll started catching up to her. She battled through injuries that slowed her down, that forced her out of games, that eventually ended her season early after she had appeared in only 13 games. 13. For a player who was supposed to be the face of an entire league's resurgence, 13 games felt like a cruel joke. She watched the rest of that season from the sidelines, in street clothes, cheering for teammates while her own body refused to cooperate. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine being 23 years old, the most famous face in your entire sport, the reason ticket sales exploded and television deals multiplied, and having to sit and watch, unable to help, unable to do the one thing you have built your entire identity around since you were a little girl throwing a ball at a hoop in your driveway. That is not the story of someone who wants to quit. That is the story of someone desperate to get back. And she did get back. She came into the 2026 season determined, healthy, or as healthy as her body would allow, motivated in a way that only a year of forced silence can create. This was supposed to be her redemption season, the year she proved that the flashes of brilliance from her rookie year were not a fluke, that she could stay on the court long enough to show the world what she was truly capable of. For a while, it looked like that story was writing itself the way everyone hoped. She was electric. In stretches through the season, she led the entire league in scoring and in assists at the same time, something almost nobody manages to do. She was averaging close to 26 points a game over some of her best runs, orchestrating the offense like a conductor who finally had her full orchestra back. Fans who had waited an entire offseason to see her healthy again were finally getting what they wanted. But basketball, especially professional basketball, rarely lets anyone have a clean story. And Caitlin Clark's season was about to take a turn that nobody could have scripted, even if they tried. It happened on a night in late June, in a game against the Phoenix Mercury. The Fever were battling, the way they had battled all season, and Clark was doing what she always does, weaving through defenders, drawing fouls, trying to create something out of nothing. And then, in a moment that would end up replayed on every sports channel in the country, Phoenix forward Alyssa Thomas made contact with Clark's throat during a play near the basket. It was not a clean basketball collision. It looked to anyone watching like something far more deliberate. Clark went down. The arena went quiet in that specific way arenas go quiet when everyone senses they just watched something that crossed a line. She stayed in the game that night, gritting through it the way she always seems to. But something had shifted. In the days that followed, the league reviewed the play and handed Alyssa Thomas a one-game suspension for her conduct. And suddenly, the conversation around Caitlin Clark was not about her scoring or her assists or her comeback season anymore. It was about her safety. About whether the most important player in the entire league was being protected the way a league's biggest asset should be protected, or whether she had become an easy target because everyone knew the cameras would always find her anyway. It became a firestorm. Commentators argued on television. Former players weighed in. Fans split into camps, some insisting the physicality was simply part of the game and Clark needed to adjust to it, others furious that a player carrying an entire league's television ratings on her shoulders kept ending up on the wrong end of hits that looked, at best, careless, and at worst, intentional. Through all of it, Clark herself stayed remarkably composed. She did not lash out. She did not demand anyone be fired or punished beyond what the league decided. She simply said in her own quiet way that she was not a robot, that some of it did get to her, that she wished the officiating would improve, and that she stood by her teammates and by everyone in the league who dealt with harassment they did not deserve. It was, by any measure, a mature response to an ugly situation. But grace under pressure does not always make headlines the way outrage does, and so the story kept churning. And then, almost as if her body agreed with the tension building around her, the back problems returned. It started quietly, the way most injuries that become serious problems tend to start. She woke up one morning with stiffness, soreness that had not been there the day before. She skipped practice to get treatment instead. Hopping a short break would be enough to shake it off before the next game. It wasn't initially listed on the injury report. And when she ended up a late scratch just before tip-off against the Portland Fire, the league actually issued a formal warning to the Indiana Fever organization for not properly disclosing her condition in time. It was a small procedural stumble in the grand scheme of a season, but it added fuel to an already smoldering fire of speculation. People online began asking questions that had nothing to do with basketball anymore. Was the team hiding something bigger? Was there tension between Clark and her coaching staff about how her body was being managed? Was this the beginning of something that would end with her walking away entirely? None of that speculation was true, but speculation rarely needs to be true to spread. It only needs to be interesting. Around the same stretch of the season, cameras caught something else that added to the noise. During a lopsided loss to the Portland Fire, one of the worst defeats of Indiana's season, Clark was seen in an animated exchange with her head coach, Stephanie White, on the sideline. It was not violent, it was not dramatic in the way people made it out to be online, but it was intense, the kind of moment where frustration boils over between two competitors who both desperately want to win and both feel the weight of an entire fan base watching their every move. Within hours, clips of the exchange were everywhere, chopped up, captioned, and spun into 100 different narratives, most of them wildly exaggerated. Some commentators went so far as to suggest Clark could no longer trust anyone in the organization, not her coaches, not her general manager, not even her own agent. It was the kind of commentary built for attention rather than accuracy, but once it entered the bloodstream of sports media, it took on a life of its own. Through it all, the team kept fighting. Indiana pushed through a stretch of tournament play, chasing a repeat title in the league's midseason cup competition, riding a 3-game winning streak that made them look, for a moment, like one of the most dangerous teams in the league. They needed a win in their final tournament game to keep their hopes alive. But an earlier loss on June 6th, one where they had actually led by as many as 12 points before letting it slip away, ended up being the difference. Even after their late surge, the tiebreaker rules worked against them, and their run in that competition ended before the championship game even arrived. It was a heartbreaking way to fall short, made even more painful by how close they had come. And then, just as the season seemed to be settling into a rhythm again, the back injury flared up for real. This time there was no quick fix, no overnight recovery. Clark was ruled out for a game against the Los Angeles Sparks, and her head coach gave reporters no timetable for her return. No indication of how serious it was. Just silence and uncertainty, the same uncertainty that had haunted the end of her previous season. For a player who had already lost most of one season to injury, hearing those words again must have felt like watching a bad dream repeat itself. Anyone who has ever fought their way back from something, an injury, a setback, a moment where your own body betrays the thing you love most, knows exactly what that fear feels like. The fear that this time, it will not heal the way it did before. The fear that the thing you have built your entire life around might slip away, not because you gave up, but because your body simply could not keep up with the demands you placed on it. To really understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to understand what Caitlin Clark actually means to the game of basketball right now. Not just as a player, but as a phenomenon. Before she ever set foot on a WNBA court, television networks were fighting over the rights to broadcast her college games. Arenas that used to be a quarter full for women's basketball were suddenly packed to the rafters, with lines stretching around city blocks just for a chance to watch warm-ups. People started calling it the Caitlin Clark effect, this strange and wonderful phenomenon where a single player's talent and charisma could single-handedly drag an entire sport into the mainstream conversation. Ticket prices for Fever Road games where she was the visiting player, sometimes cost more than tickets to see the home team's championship banner raised. Jerseys with her name on the back became some of the best-selling merchandise in the history of the league, worn by kids who had never watched a single WNBA game before she arrived, and by grown adults who suddenly found themselves rearranging their evenings around tip-off times. That kind of attention is a gift and a burden all at once. It is a gift because it means more resources for the entire league, more opportunities for every player on every roster, more visibility for a sport that spent decades fighting for a fraction of the coverage men's basketball received without even trying. But it is also a burden, because it means every stumble, every injury, every sideline argument, every hard foul gets magnified under a microscope that no other rookie in the history of the league has ever had to survive. When Caitlin Clark gets hurt, it is not just a basketball story. It becomes a business story, a cultural story, a story that ends up on the front page of newspapers that have never covered women's sports seriously in their entire existence. And so when she went down clutching her throat after that collision with Alyssa Thomas, it was never going to stay a small, contained basketball moment. It could not, because too many people, for too many reasons, had a stake in what happened to her. Let's slow down and really sit inside that moment for a second. Picture it. The Fever are grinding through a tight, physical game against the Mercury, the kind of game where every possession matters and every referee's whistle gets second-guessed by both benches. Clark drives toward the basket, the way she has driven toward 1,000 baskets before, weaving between bodies that are bigger and stronger than her, trusting her quickness and her instincts to create just enough space to make a play. And then, suddenly, there is contact where there should not have been contact. Not a shoulder, not a hip, her throat. She staggers. She grabs at her neck instinctively, the way anyone would when something touches a part of the body that feels dangerously vulnerable. The whistle blows, but it is not the whistle anyone expects. No foul is called in that first instant. The game keeps moving for a beat too long before officials finally stop play to assess what just happened. In the stands, you can feel 18,000 people hold their breath at the exact same moment. Because everyone in that building understands, instantly, that this is different from a normal hard foul. This is the kind of moment that ends up on every highlight show in the country by morning. The kind of moment that reignites a debate that had already been simmering all season about whether the league's biggest star was being adequately protected on the court. The league reviewed it. They handed down a one-game suspension to Alyssa Thomas. And for a few days, it felt like the story might settle there. One incident, one punishment, one lesson learned, and the season moves on. But stories like this rarely settle that quickly, especially not when they involve someone as scrutinized as Caitlin Clark. Instead, it became a launching point for a much bigger conversation about physicality in the league. Some veteran players and commentators argued that this was simply the price of admission for stardom, that physical basketball had always been part of the WNBA's identity, and that Clark, like every rookie before her, needed to adjust and toughen up rather than expecting special treatment. Others pushed back hard against that framing, arguing that there is a difference between hard, physical basketball and dangerous contact near the throat, and that using the language of toughness to excuse genuinely reckless plays put every player in the league at unnecessary risk, not just Clark. Caitlin Clark, for her part, mostly stayed out of the shouting match. In her own comments to reporters, she chose her words carefully. She acknowledged that the constant physicality and constant media attention wears on her, that she is human, not a machine built to absorb endless criticism and endless contact without ever feeling it. But she also refused to play the victim. She defended her teammates. She defended other players around the league who deal with harassment and criticism they never signed up for. She called for better officiating, not louder outrage. It was the kind of response that, if you were paying close attention, told you everything you needed to know about who she actually is underneath all the noise. Not a fragile rookie overwhelmed by fame, not a diva demanding special protection. Just a young woman trying to do her job, trying to stay professional, while an entire ecosystem of cameras and commentators searched for the next dramatic headline to build around her. But bodies do not care about narratives. Bodies care about wear and tear, about the accumulated cost of thousands of sprints and jumps and hard landings, about months and years of pushing through soreness, because the games do not stop for anyone, no matter how famous they are. And Caitlin Clark's body had already been sending warning signs for a long time before that night against the Mercury. Let's rewind for a moment, back before the WNBA, back before the endless debates about physicality and protection, back to a gym in Iowa City where a college kid was quietly rewriting the record books one game at a time. Because to really understand the woman fighting through this 2026 season, You need to understand the fire that got her here in the first place. Caitlin Clark's college career at Iowa was not just successful, it was seismic. She arrived as a heavily recruited freshman, but even the most optimistic scouts underestimated what she would become. By her sophomore and junior seasons, she was routinely putting up performances that looked more like video game statistics than real basketball box scores. 40 points here, a triple-double there. Logo three-pointers that defenders simply gave up contesting because they knew, deep down, that contesting them rarely worked anyway. She played with a swagger that some people loved and some people found polarizing, staring down opponents after big shots, pointing at her wrist as if to say the moment belonged to her and everyone else was just visiting. Her senior year, she led Iowa on an improbable run through March Madness, and along the way, she broke the all-time NCAA scoring record, a record that had stood, in various forms, across decades of both men's and women's basketball. Arenas that had never once sold out for a women's basketball game suddenly could not find enough seats. Television ratings for her games began outperforming NBA games airing in the same time slots, a fact that stunned network executives who had spent years treating women's college basketball as an afterthought buried on secondary channels. She took Iowa to back-to-back national championship games. They did not win either time, falling short against powerhouse programs loaded with future professional talent. And in a strange way, those losses became part of her story too. They showed the world that she was human, that heartbreak did not break her, that she could stand at a podium after the most devastating loss of her career and still speak with grace, still credit her opponents, still promise she would come back stronger. When the WNBA draft arrived in 2024, there was no suspense about who would go first overall. The Indiana Fever, a franchise that had struggled for years to fill seats and build a consistent winning culture, selected her with the very first pick. And almost overnight, everything about that franchise changed. Season ticket sales exploded. The team's schedule became a hot commodity for television networks. Road games featuring the Fever started drawing crowds that rivaled, and sometimes exceeded, crowds for the home team's own biggest rivalry games. It was, by any measure, one of the most dramatic single-player transformations of a franchise's fortunes in the history of professional sports. But here is the part of the story that so often gets lost underneath the highlight reels and the ticket sale numbers. Stepping into that spotlight as a 22-year-old rookie meant stepping into a level of physical competition unlike anything she had ever experienced. College basketball, even at its highest level, simply does not prepare anyone for the strength, speed, and physicality of grown professional athletes who have spent years sculpting their bodies specifically to compete at that level. Veteran defenders in the WNBA are not intimidated by reputations built in college gymnasiums. If anything, a hyped rookie becomes exactly the kind of target that veteran players relish testing, both because proving themselves against a star raises their own profile, and because there is a long, unspoken tradition in professional sports of making rookies earn their respect the hard way. And so her rookie season became a brutal initiation. She absorbed hard screens that would have drawn technical fouls in college, but were treated as ordinary basketball plays in the professional ranks. She got knocked to the floor on drives to the basket again and again, sometimes drawing a whistle, sometimes not. Commentators and former players debated constantly on television whether she was being unfairly targeted, or whether this was simply the normal cost of being a rookie point guard trying to create offense against seasoned professional defenders. The truth, as it usually is, was probably somewhere in between. Some of the contact was ordinary basketball physicality that every rookie experiences. Some of it, especially as the season wore on and her fame kept growing, started to look like something more deliberate. Players testing whether the golden girl of the league could be rattled, could be worn down, could be made to look overwhelmed in front of the biggest audiences women's basketball had ever drawn. She did not look overwhelmed. She looked determined. Game after game, hit after hit, she kept getting back up, kept finding open teammates, kept pulling up from ranges that made defenders' rotations look a full step too slow. She earned Rookie of the Year honors. She made the all-star team as a rookie, a rare feat in any professional league. She set rookie records for assists that had stood for years. By any objective measure, her first season was a spectacular success. But the accumulated physical toll of that season, all those hard falls, all those collisions, all those minutes played under a level of physical and media pressure no rookie in the league's history had ever faced, started to show up the following year. Injuries crept in. Not one dramatic, headline-grabbing injury, but a series of smaller ones, nagging issues that limited her, that forced her out of games here and there, that eventually built into something serious enough to end her second season early after only 13 appearances. 13 games. For the most famous player in the sport, the one whose face appeared on billboards and whose jersey sales outpaced entire rosters combined, 13 games felt almost cruelly small. She spent the rest of that season doing something that must have been agonizing for someone with her competitive drive. She watched. From the bench, in street clothes, cheering for teammates while unable to help them in the way she desperately wanted to. Anyone who has ever loved something deeply, a sport, a craft, a passion that defines who they are, knows exactly how painful that kind of forced sideline exile can feel. It is not just physical pain. It is a kind of grief watching the thing you love continue without you, wondering if your body will ever let you fully return to it. And yet, she did return. She came back for the 2026 season with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to prove that the flashes of brilliance from her rookie year were not a fluke cut short by bad luck, but the beginning of something sustainable, something built to last. For a while, that story looked like it was writing itself exactly the way she and every fan of the sport hoped it would. Let's talk about what it actually feels like to be injured as a professional athlete, because most people who have never lived through it imagine it as simple rest. Sit on the couch, ice the injury, wait a few weeks, and everything goes back to normal. The reality is far more complicated. Especially for someone whose body has already been through the accumulated stress of 2 full professional seasons layered on top of a college career that pushed her further and harder than almost anyone else in the history of the sport. A back injury, specifically, is one of the cruelest things that can happen to an athlete whose entire game depends on quick, explosive movement. It is not like a sprained ankle, where you can often point to a single moment, a single misstep, and understand exactly what went wrong. Back issues build slowly, silently, through months and years of micro-stresses that accumulate until one day, seemingly out of nowhere, the body simply says no further. Clark first felt the stiffness creeping in during a stretch of games in May, waking up sore, skipping practice for treatment, pushing through soreness that most fans watching at home would never even notice because she still managed to compete at an elite level despite it. That is one of the most remarkable and least appreciated parts of professional sports. The gap between what fans see on television, a player gliding effortlessly through a game, and what that player's body actually feels like underneath the uniform, is often enormous. By late June, after the collision with Alyssa Thomas and the mounting media firestorm that followed, her back problems reached a breaking point that could no longer be managed with a few extra treatment sessions. She was ruled out entirely for a game against the Los Angeles Sparks. Her coach, Stephana White, faced reporters and gave the kind of answer that no fan ever wants to hear about their favorite player. No timetable, no clear indication of severity. Just the honest, uncomfortable admission that nobody yet knew exactly when Caitlin Clark would be able to play basketball again. For a fan base that had already endured watching her miss the majority of the previous season, that news landed like a gut punch. Social media exploded with worried messages, speculation, and yes, unfortunately, the kind of exaggerated, fabricated headlines that eventually spiraled into false claims about her retiring entirely, about some imaginary press conference where she supposedly announced she was done with the fever forever. None of that ever happened. But in the vacuum created by real uncertainty, real fear, and a real absence of clear information, rumors like that spread with terrifying speed. People wanted an explanation for why their favorite player kept disappearing from the lineup, and in the absence of a satisfying one, some corners of the internet simply invented one. The truth, as it so often is, turned out to be far less dramatic and far more human. Clark was not quitting anything. She was doing what every injured athlete has to do, the unglamorous, unphotographed work of rehabilitation. Treatment sessions, careful, monitored practice reps, conversations with medical staff about how much her body could handle without risking a longer-term setback. It is slow, frustrating, repetitive work, nothing like the highlight reel plays that made her famous in the first place. But it is the work that determines whether a career continues or ends prematurely. And slowly, gradually, the news started to turn positive. In early July, she addressed reporters again, this time with a noticeably different tone in her voice. She told them she was feeling a lot better, that the week of rest and treatment had been incredibly helpful for her overall health. She was returning to practice. She still wasn't ready to play in the team's next game, a matchup against the Las Vegas Aces, choosing caution over rushing back too soon, especially given the demanding back-to-back scheduling that awaited the team. But she spoke with real optimism about getting back onto the court soon, about feeling positive, about trusting the process even though every competitive fiber in her body was surely screaming at her to get back out there immediately. That is the actual update, not a retirement, not an exit. A 24-year-old professional athlete, cautiously, intelligently managing an injury, listening to her medical staff, and expressing genuine hope about returning to the game she has dedicated her entire life to. It is a far less dramatic headline than the one that started circulating about her supposedly quitting. But it is the truth, and the truth, in this case, is actually the more inspiring story. Because here is what gets lost when people manufacture fake drama around real athletes going through real struggles. The actual story, the one grounded in reality, is already compelling enough. It does not need embellishment. It does not need a fabricated commissioner's statement or an invented tearful farewell speech. The real story is about a young woman who has spent her entire life absorbing hit after hit, criticism after criticism, expectation after expectation, and who keeps finding a way to show up anyway. That is not weakness. That is not someone on the verge of walking away. That is one of the most resilient competitors in the entire sport, doing the quiet, unglamorous work of healing so she can get back to doing what she loves. Think about everything she has already survived just to get to this point in her career. A rookie season where opposing players treated her like a target to be tested. A sophomore season cut brutally short by injury after only 13 games. A comeback season interrupted by a frightening collision to the throat that could have ended far worse than it did. A league investigation, a suspension for her opponent, and weeks of media scrutiny questioning whether the entire league was doing enough to protect her. A sideline argument with her own coach, captured on camera and blown wildly out of proportion by commentators hungry for controversy. An injury report controversy that resulted in a formal league warning to her own team. A heartbreaking elimination from a tournament her team had genuinely believed they could win. And now, a back injury serious enough to sideline her indefinitely, with no clear timetable for return. Any one of those challenges alone would be enough to test the resilience of even the most mentally tough athlete. She has faced all of them, layered on top of each other, within the span of about 2 years, all while carrying the weight of being the most watched, most talked about, most scrutinized player in the entire sport. And through every single one of those challenges, she has kept showing up. She has kept speaking to reporters with maturity instead of bitterness. She has kept defending her teammates instead of throwing anyone under the bus. She has kept working, quietly, patiently, toward getting back onto the court. There is a strange irony sitting at the heart of this whole situation, one worth pausing on for a moment. The very thing that makes Caitlin Clark's career so remarkable, the massive, unprecedented attention she has brought to her sport, is the same thing that makes every setback in her career feel amplified 100 times over. When a lesser-known player deals with a nagging back injury, it barely makes local news. When Caitlin Clark deals with the exact same kind of injury, it becomes a national story, dissected on morning talk shows, debated by commentators who have never watched a full WNBA game in their lives, spun into wild theories by anonymous accounts looking for engagement rather than accuracy. That kind of scrutiny would break plenty of people. Imagine having every private struggle, every physical setback, every moment of frustration on a sideline turned into a public spectacle, picked apart by millions of strangers who have never met you, who know nothing about your actual relationship with your coaches or teammates, but who feel entitled to an opinion anyway. Imagine scrolling through your phone after a tough loss or a scary injury and seeing headlines claiming things about your life that are simply, completely false. That is the reality Caitlin Clark lives with every single day of her professional career. And yet, if you listen closely to how she actually talks about her situation, in her own words, not in the words commentators put in her mouth, you hear something remarkably grounded. She has acknowledged that the attention and criticism affects her, because of course it does. She is human, not some emotionless machine built to absorb infinite scrutiny without ever feeling it. But she has also consistently refused to play into the drama. She defends her teammates. She defends the league. She calls for better officiating without demanding special treatment for herself. She talks about wanting to get back on the court, not about wanting to escape from a situation that has become too difficult to bear. That distinction matters enormously, and it is exactly the distinction that gets erased when fake headlines claim she is quitting entirely. There is a world of difference between an athlete who is frustrated by unfair treatment and wants the system to improve, and an athlete who is ready to walk away from the sport altogether. Every piece of actual evidence, her own words, her own actions, her own consistent effort to return from injury as quickly as her medical team will safely allow, points overwhelmingly toward the former. She is not someone looking for an exit. She is someone fighting to stay in the fight, even when that fight has cost her more than most fans will ever fully understand. Think about her teammates for a moment too, because their perspective matters in this story just as much as hers. Players like Aaliyah Boston, who has anchored that Fever roster through years of rebuilding, and newer additions like Paige Buchers, another former college superstar who joined the Fever and quickly became one of Clark's most trusted partners on the court, breaking franchise assist records alongside her. These are players who have watched Clark absorb hit after hit, criticism after criticism, and who have continued to show up alongside her, continued to compete alongside her, continued to speak about her not as some fragile symbol of controversy, but as a genuine competitor and teammate who makes everyone around her better. When teammates consistently defend a player, consistently choose to play alongside them, consistently credit them for lifting the entire team's performance, that tells you something real about who that person actually is inside a locker room, away from the cameras and the noise. Consider the fans, too, the ones who show up early to arenas across the country just for a chance to watch warm-ups, who buy tickets to road games specifically because Caitlin Clark is on the visiting roster, who have turned WNBA basketball from a niche interest into something approaching a genuine cultural phenomenon. Those fans have watched every twist of this story alongside her. They watched her rookie season triumphs and struggles. They watched her sophomore season cut short by injury. They watched this current season's mix of brilliant highs and painful setbacks. And overwhelmingly, what they want, what they have consistently expressed through ticket sales, through jersey purchases, through the sheer volume of attention they pour into her games, is not for her to disappear. It is for her to get healthy, to get back on the court, and to keep doing the thing that made them fall in love with watching her in the first place. That is the actual emotional core of this story. Not an ending, not a farewell. A community of fans, teammates, and coaches all hopping for the same thing, a full recovery, a return to the court, a continuation of a career that has already reshaped the landscape of an entire sport in less than 3 years. So where does that leave us right now, in this exact moment? Caitlin Clark is not gone. She is not retired. She has not quit the Indiana Fever, and no commissioner ever confirmed any such thing because it never happened. What is true, what is real, is a young woman working through the physical toll of a back injury that has cost her games throughout this season, just as injuries cost her most of the previous one. What is true is that she has spoken publicly, recently, about feeling better, about returning to practice, about genuine optimism regarding her return to the lineup. What is true is that every single piece of adversity that has come her way, the hard fouls, the throat injury, the the sideline tension, the tournament heartbreak, the recurring back problems, has been met not with surrender, but with the same quiet, stubborn determination that first got her noticed in a gym in Iowa all those years ago, chasing her older brothers around, refusing to be left behind. It is worth stepping back one more time to think about why stories like the fake one, the one claiming she quit, the one claiming a commissioner confirmed some dramatic exit, spread so easily in the first place. Part of it is simple human psychology. Dramatic headlines get more clicks than nuanced ones. A story that says a beloved athlete quietly worked through a nagging back injury and is cautiously optimistic about returning does not generate the same explosive reaction as a story claiming she stormed away from her team forever. The algorithms that decide what content spreads across the internet do not reward accuracy. They reward emotional intensity, shock, outrage, heartbreak, betrayal. And so, in an ecosystem built around those incentives, it is almost inevitable that the truth, however compelling it actually is, gets buried underneath louder, more sensational fabrications. But there is a cost to that kind of misinformation that goes beyond just confusing fans for a few days before the truth catches up. When people spread fake stories about an athlete quitting, retiring, or walking away from their team, it does something quietly corrosive to how we understand real struggle, real adversity, and real resilience. It flattens a genuinely complicated, genuinely inspiring story. A young woman fighting through injury after injury, criticism after criticism, refusing to give up despite everything stacked against her, into a cheap, disposable headline designed purely to generate outrage clicks for a few hours before being forgotten entirely. It robs the real story of its power. Because the real story here is powerful. It really is. Think about everything Caitlin Clark has already accomplished before even turning 25 years old. She rewrote the record books in college basketball, becoming the all-time leading scorer in the history of the sport, at any level, men's or women's. She single-handedly transformed television ratings and ticket sales for an entire professional league that had spent decades fighting for basic recognition. She absorbed a brutal initiation into professional basketball as a rookie facing physicality that tested every ounce of her toughness, and she not only survived it, she thrived, earning Rookie of the Year honors and an all-star selection in her very first season. She battled through an injury-shortened sophomore season that would have crushed the spirit of a less determined competitor, watching helplessly from the sidelines as her team played on without her. And she came back for this season with renewed purpose, only to face a fresh gauntlet of challenges, a frightening collision that sparked a league-wide safety conversation, a heartbreaking tournament elimination, sideline tensions blown wildly out of proportion by outside commentary, and now, another significant injury threatening to sideline her once again. Through every single chapter of that story, she has kept getting back up. That is not a story about someone quitting. That is a story about one of the most resilient competitors currently playing professional sports anywhere in the world. And here is something else worth sitting with as this story continues to unfold in real time. Because unlike so many stories that get wrapped up neatly with a satisfying conclusion, this one is still being written. Nobody knows exactly when Caitlin Clark's back will fully heal. Nobody knows exactly how the rest of this season will play out for her or for the Indiana Fever as a franchise. Nobody knows exactly what long-term impact all of this accumulated physical and mental strain will have on the remainder of her career. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, especially for fans who desperately want reassurance that everything will work out fine. But that uncertainty is also, in its own way, part of what makes her story so genuinely gripping. This is not a scripted drama with a predetermined ending. This is a real person, dealing with real physical pain, real professional pressure, and real emotional weight, navigating all of it in front of the largest audience women's basketball has ever had, and doing so with a level of composure and maturity that would be remarkable for an athlete twice her age. So the next time a headline crosses your feed claiming some dramatic, shocking update about a player quitting a team, or a commissioner confirming some explosive announcement that seems to have come out of nowhere, it is worth pausing for just a moment before believing it. It is worth asking where that information actually came from. It is worth remembering that the algorithms rewarding our attention are not designed to reward truth. They are designed to reward whatever keeps us scrolling a few seconds longer. And it is worth remembering that the real stories, the ones grounded in what actually happened, are almost always more interesting, more human, and more meaningful than whatever fabricated version gets manufactured to chase clicks. Caitlin Clark did not quit the Indiana fever. No commissioner confirmed any such thing because there was nothing to confirm. What actually happened? What is still happening right now is far more human than that fake headline ever could have captured. A 24-year-old athlete, carrying the weight of an entire league's resurgence on her shoulders, fighting through injury after injury, absorbing hit after hit, both physical and emotional, and continuing to show up, continuing to work, continuing to hope, continuing to believe that her body will heal enough to let her get back to doing the one thing she has loved since she was a little girl throwing a basketball at a hoop that once felt impossibly far away. That hoop does not feel so far away anymore. She has already reached heights that nobody, not even the most optimistic dreamer in that Iowa gym all those years ago, could have fully predicted. And if the pattern of her entire career tells us anything, if the way she has responded to every single setback so far tells us anything, it is that betting against her recovery, betting against her return, betting against her continuing to fight for this game she loves, would be a very risky bet indeed. She will heal. She will get back on that court. And when she does, you can be sure that the cameras, the headlines, and millions of fans around the world will be watching, hopping this time, finally. The story gets to be about basketball again, and nothing else. Because underneath all the noise, all the fabricated headlines, all the manufactured controversy, that is really all she has ever wanted in the first place. A healthy body, a basketball in her hands, and a chance to play the game that made a little girl in Iowa fall in love with it in the first place. And that, unlike the fake headline that started this whole conversation, is a story worth believing in. There is one more piece of this story worth telling, because it might be the most important piece of all. Somewhere out there, right now, there is a little girl in a driveway somewhere, maybe in Iowa, maybe in Indiana, maybe in a country that has never had much of a women's basketball culture at all, throwing a ball at a hoop that feels impossibly far away, the exact same way Caitlin Clark once did. And that little girl is watching this season unfold. She's watching her hero get knocked down, again and again, by injuries and hard fouls and unfair scrutiny and headlines that twist the truth into something unrecognizable. And she is also watching that same hero get back up, again and again, choosing patience over panic, choosing quiet, determined rehabilitation over dramatic declarations, choosing to keep believing in her own return even when nobody could promise her exactly when that return would come. That is the real lesson sitting underneath all of this noise. Not that life, or sports, or fame is fair. It clearly is not. Not that setbacks do not hurt, because they very obviously do deeply, in ways that no highlight reel ever fully captures. The real lesson is that resilience is rarely loud. It rarely announces itself with a dramatic press conference or a viral moment. Most of the time, resilience looks exactly like what Caitlin Clark has been doing this entire season, showing up for treatment sessions nobody films, doing rehabilitation exercises nobody claps for, having quiet conversations with medical staff about packing and patience, and slowly, carefully, working her way back toward the court one cautious step at a time. It is easy to romanticize comebacks after they happen, to look back at a triumphant return and talk about destiny and inevitability, as if the outcome was always guaranteed. But living through the uncertain middle of a comeback, not knowing exactly when your body will cooperate again, not knowing exactly what the next headline will falsely claim about you, not knowing exactly how the rest of a season already full of adversity will unfold, that is an entirely different kind of challenge. That is the challenge Caitlin Clark is living through right now, in this exact moment, as this story is being told. And whatever happens next, whether her back heals in time for a triumphant second half of the season, or whether this becomes another chapter of patience and rehabilitation stretching further than anyone would like, one thing has already been proven beyond any doubt by everything she has already survived. She is not someone who quits. She never has been. Not when veteran defenders tested her as a rookie. Not when injuries stole most of an entire season from her. Not when a frightening collision put her safety at the center of a national conversation. Not when cameras twisted a single sideline moment into wild, exaggerated stories about broken trust. Not when a heartbreaking tiebreaker ended her team's tournament hopes. And not now, sidelined once again, working quietly toward a return that she has every intention of making. The fake headline said she quit. The truth says something far more powerful. She stayed. She keeps staying. And that, in the end, is the story actually worth telling. So no, Caitlin Clark did not quit the fever. No commissioner confirmed her exit because it never happened. What is happening, right now, as you finish hearing this, is a young woman healing, working, hopping, and preparing to walk back onto that court the same way she has walked onto every court since she was a little girl in Iowa, refusing to be left behind, refusing to back down, and refusing, absolutely refusing, to quit.